introduce Natalie from Github.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here to talk to everybody about the journey into InnerSource. I'm Natalie Bradley. I'm a field architect with Github. I've been working with Github for just about a year and a half. And prior to that, I've spent the last decade working with organizations on modernizing their technology, changing their processes, getting users to adopt and embrace all of this change. Just to give you any idea of how old I am, it's now called digital transformation. It was just do cool things in our organization when I started. And today at GitHub, I do pretty much the same thing, but I help organizations with scaling modern technologies, building better software, doing InnerSource, leveraging open source with GitHub as that enablement platform at its core. So a real quick overview of this talk. I'm between you all and lunch, but I am from New Jersey, so hopefully I can talk fast enough that I won't impact you guys. So I'm going to just level set what is InnerSource so that we're all talking on the same page, define a problem that organizations have today, how InnerSource helps that problem, and it's one thing to understand InnerSource and how it helps, but it's a whole other thing to implement it, so I will walk through that and how you can do that in your organization, and then some next steps that you can take when you literally go back to your office. As I mentioned, I work with a ton of organizations and helping them with change, transformation, and with InnerSource, so I am going to weave a true story throughout this presentation about a journey that a customer that I worked with went on. It's a bit of an extreme story, but it is true nonetheless, and I'll explain all the details here shortly. So what is InnerSource? It's all about taking all of the advantages, all of the knowledge and culture that we learned from the open source community, turning it inward into our own organization behind our own firewall. But when I talk about InnerSource today, I'm going to refer to it as more than just source code and sharing. It's all about breaking down the silos, enabling your internal community, embracing new onboarding strategic initiatives, helping people with onboarding, and also figuring out how to contribute back to the open source community if that's your initiative, or just contribute back across your organization itself. So what's the problem? Technology is gaining on us, right? It is at a pace that is ridiculous that organizations are having a hard time to keep up with. We see companies from one industry breaking down barriers and entering into a new industry and taking out companies along their path. So organizations know that they need to change, right? They're looking to do different things, change their culture, modify their technologies, complete process re-engineering. But at the heart of it, what companies want is to be more agile and efficient, find cost effectiveness or effective opportunities where they can, be customer first, be secure without being stifled by security, and to remain competitive. And all of these things describe truly being a software company, right? Andreessen Horowitz said it in 2016 that every company is becoming a software company. And we're not just talking about the born-in-cloud companies anymore, like Airbnb and Hulu, but we're also talking about financial tech companies like Bloomberg and brick-and-mortar companies like Walmart. 62% of CEOs have software as a focus on their list of initiatives. So what's the problem? If we know what this is, why it's going to help us, what our focus area is, we find that organizations just don't know how. How do I make these changes? How do I get my people to want to do things differently? How do I flex a culture that might have existed for decades now? So I'm going to go into a story now. And as I mentioned, it is a true story, but to protect the innocent, I did work in the intelligence community for quite a while. I'm changing the name of the organization. So for today, it's called SPIES. I can neither confirm nor deny the true name of the organization. But it's an extreme example for two reasons. One is the culture. The culture is entirely need to know only, right? As part of your onboarding procedures, they tell you if you don't think you need to know about it, don't ask. And if you don't think somebody else needs to know about it, don't tell them. That is the basis of the culture. It's also quite unique because they are US-based, but they have data centers and people around the globe, and they work entirely on an air-gapped network. So if you think about being at work and you have an issue and you Google it, or you just want to check out Instagram, whatever the case may be, These folks can't do that, right? It's not part of their culture, and it's absolutely not part of their network. And the second reason why this is extreme is because of the journey that they went through. I mean, they did not have any stone unturned throughout this journey. But I do share the story because I think it's very, very relevant to creating an InnerSource culture, and it's also very relatable, at least in some of the aspects throughout the story. So I don't have any pictures. Again, I want to protect the innocent, but back in 2008, there was a bit of a catastrophe that happened, and this organization recognized that they were being completely overcome by other organizations in their industry, and so they needed change. And their senior leadership got together and they did a deep dive into the organization to figure out what is wrong, what can we do better, what can we do different. Well, they recognized that they weren't customer first, they weren't even customer focused. The only thing that they could do was satisfy their customers using their systems and ensure that they stayed up, that they didn't crash, that they were eventually patched, that maybe a new version was released, but there was absolutely no focus on getting customers what they wanted. Their data centers were all over the world, and they're completely inconsistent with the type of hardware, the age of the hardware, and hardware itself is a nightmare. Ordering hardware, configuring it rapid, all of this stuff, everybody knows those issues. So they decided infrastructure was their problem. So they went in on cloud. They went all in on cloud. $600 million they paid a commercial cloud provider to create them basically their own region. I mentioned they're on their own air-gapped network, so they had some special requirements. This cloud company modified, made their specifications, and built it. And it took about 2 or 3 years to build it, to make it a thing, to have it available, to get it through accreditation, to get it through security, all their processes and everything. And on this glorious day, this cloud, this big, shiny, fluffy, however you describe a cloud, is available. And so the senior leadership rejoiced, and they told everyone, come one, come all, use our incredible cloud. They brought out the golden carrot. They did not require anybody to use it, but they encouraged everyone to onboard so they can eliminate some of the data centers. And months and months and many months went by, and not a single team moved to their cloud. And so they are like, what's the deal? Like, we're focusing on all of these great changes for our organization, but nobody's using this awesome new infrastructure that we've provided. And we see this a lot in organizations, right? They grab onto a modern technology and they think that it's going to be the change wheel for them, that this technology is going to do everything that they hoped it was, and all they have to do is just encourage it. But in reality, they're not focusing on making a software company is about the developers. It's about innovation. It's about changing the way you do business. And a lot of organizations then turn to more tools, right? We see DevOps popping up all over the place. And DevOps is phenomenal, do not get me wrong. It is based off of great core practices, workflows that are efficient, more automation for all of the things. We build more securely, more compliant. We shift things to the left. We wrap this in a glorious culture of collaboration and continuous improvement. And so our friends over at SPIES have recognized that they weren't giving the developers the tools to actually migrate to a cloud, right? So we built this great cloud, they have no way of doing it. So if we're going to encourage them to go there, we need to actually give them the pathway to get there. And so I got brought on at this point to create a DevOps platform for their entire enterprise. It's 12,000 developers and about another 20 to 25,000 software members of those teams. So it's a very large organization. They want everybody to use the same platform. We started with GitHub as that enablement piece to make sharing, to make collaboration, to make all of the goodness of software development easy. And we continue to build out over the course of time. One thing we did really well, and we did really often, and I highly recommend it, is the workforce engagement piece that we stood up. It was basically a communications arm where we could reach out to all of the developers, to all of the software team, and let them know what's going on, what our thoughts were, what changes were happening, words from senior leadership, encouragement, all of that great stuff. And we started to see DevOps excellence in pockets. All over the organization, we were seeing teams that actually were doing continuous integration all the way to continuous delivery. We saw security starting to get embedded in these teams. We started to see configuration management, product managers using these tools. Like, it was great, but it wasn't what we were after, right? It was pockets of excellence. DevOps has this promise of these elusive, incredible results, right? 26 times faster recovery, 7 times lower failure of change. But the truth is that only about 7% of organizations at scale see these kind of elusive metrics. So you gotta think to yourself, right? If only 7% of organizations actually have these glorious results, what are 93% of organizations doing wrong? We're just not doing it all, right? So when you look at these 7% of companies and find out what they're doing, it's to realize that they've recognized that DevOps alone isn't enough. It's one thing to give everyone tools, an incredible cloud, all of this modern technology, and to have the golden carrot to encourage everybody to do it. But if you don't talk to them, if you don't help them and show them how, you're not going to get there. As a matter of fact, all organizations, regardless of whether they admit to it or not, are still working in silos. DevOps absolutely breaks down some of those silos, but it really just extends those project teams, right? You start to embed security in it, but you're not engaging security across the board, right? Your one team might start to have a great relationship between dev and ops, but it's often not consistent across all development and operation teams. So if you think an organization kind of looks a little bit like this, right? You have a project team, they work into a supervisor or a team lead or whatever the case may be. And somebody on a project team, perhaps the yellow team, has a problem. They have an issue, they're not sure what to do with a problem that they've incurred. And somebody on the green team has the same problem. But the guy on the green team went to his team lead, who knew somebody on the blue team, who knew somebody on the purple team that might have had a related issue, and so they asked, and sure enough, the answer finally eventually works its way back to somebody on the yellow team. Now, in all reality, this could be hours, this could be days, and God forbid the guy on the blue team actually takes a vacation. Who knows how long this could actually take. But our organizations look a lot more like this, right? We have hundreds of teams and hundreds of team leads. This is not collaboration that these 3 people were able to find each other. This is called leveraging your network. It's about finding who's out there that might have had a similar problem to help you endure it, right? Collaboration is working together. It's achieving the same goals. It's a more proactive approach and less responsive approach. All right, so let's go back to our buddies over at Spies, and this actually is a picture this time. We had a turning point. So the CIO comes down to my office and he says, I need to do something big. Things are going, but they're going a lot slower than they want. We've got a lot of money riding on all of this, and we're just not seeing the change that we wanted. So we want to migrate one of our humongous legacy apps into our new cloud. And I'm going to give you about 3 weeks to do it. In a very generous 24 hours, I will shut the system down out of production on a weekend. Now, the system he's referring to is used by 18,000 people throughout the organization every single day. It's the type of system that you log into and the page eventually renders, and then you go to run a report, and then you go get a cup of coffee, you chat with everybody about their weekend, and you come back to your desk and you hope that the report is run. It had 11 years worth of data, and because of the requirements of this organization, all of the information had to migrate with the cloud. So we put our best effort forward. We figured out what, if anything, needed to be refactored, re-architected, all of that great stuff. Showed up on the weekend. We migrated the app in only 10 hours, which was pretty impressive. Patted ourselves on the back, and we were done. And that week, as people started to come into work and log into the system, they were like incredibly excited, right? Things are faster, things are moving, like I can actually get my work done. We actually got a nasty note from somebody that we ruined his coffee break, but I digress. So every time we got a note or something from someone that was excited, we sent them a note. And in the note, it said, this is awesome, thanks for the great work. We moved this application to the cloud using DevOps tools and best practices, leveraging expertise and knowledge from tons of people from across the organization. We documented everything that we did, from the user requirements and security to issues and improvements all along the way. You can see everything that we did here and even leverage it within your own project. So we put the URL for our GitHub repository. Everything that we did on my team, we had open in public. It was the open the kimono because we had nothing to hide. And over the next couple of weeks, we started to see our repos getting watched and people are asterisks, putting them as stars, pinning them. We started to see a couple forks here and there. We started to see a couple clones. And it was 2 months after the migration happened that I hear one of my developers in his office screaming of joy. So we all run into his office. What's going on, what's going on? He's like, you aren't gonna believe this, but we got a pull request. Like our first legit pull request. He's like, it's actually really, really good. It was to, they found an issue with one of our scripts to migrate the data and it was an improvement. He tested it, and while we all stood in his office, he accepted the pull request, merged it, and we celebrated. Like we were ecstatic, jumping for joy, like this is the greatest thing ever. And earlier I had noted that one thing we did really well, really early, was to create that workforce engagement arm, that communications board for everybody. And so we wrote all about this little event, right? We gave the guy who put in the PR some creds. He became a little bit of a celebrity in our organization. And we told everybody what a PR was, what a pull request was, how you do it, why it's beneficial, how you can engage. And slowly over the next few months, we started to see more and more of this activity happening, right? We had a ton of repositories in GitHub, but they were all private because this is need to know only. We started to see a little bit of a switch where people started to make their repositories public, invite additional teams. We started to see this kind of working. So at this point, we decided we need to make a dedicated effort into InnerSource, right? We've got the tools, we've got the infrastructure, we've got the greatest golden carrot any organization could want. We just need to now start showing the people how to do it. So how InnerSource helps? I think it's kind of obvious, but I'll go through that anyway. If the goals of InnerSource are all about reuse and collaboration, community, and building better software faster, leveraging the tenets of InnerSource get you to these goals. And these goals entirely translate to a better organization that's software focused. So the tenets, it's all about being open and transparent, being participative, collaborative, and governed. So what do these mean? Open and transparent, showing everyone all of the things, not just that it exists, but also showing them the details. So I like to use the restaurant example here. Being open is you can go in and grab a table, but being transparent is the kitchen that shows you how the sausage is made. And that's the stuff that's really key to organizations, is actually seeing the inner works of it. Participative and collaborative. Collaborative, again, working together toward the same initiative, toward the same goal, building things across teams together. Being participative is actually taking action and getting involved without being told to do so, but out of willingness or want. And then lastly, governed. We hear it all the time, especially with organizations that are using DevOps. Like fail often, fail safely, we want you to fail, fail is great, right? Making sure you have a governed platform, that your InnerSource community understands what it means, what your guardrails are, how you've set up repositories, permissions, that will help you successfully check that tenant off and get to your goals. And it all comes down to those benefits of open source are legit those of InnerSource. And the last one is the network effect between developers, and that was the one that we really rode on because we started to see developers kind of getting a little competitive. Wait a minute, if they're doing that, why can't I do that? Actually, I'm just gonna steal their stuff and one-up them. So that really, really worked to our advantage. So what was it that we did that you can also do to actually make InnerSourcing a marketed event? 3 components of InnerSourcing to strive for. Focus areas, and if you're an individual contributor here, or if you are a manager or someone in a leadership role, these all apply both ways. You yourself can take action on these, or as an organization, provide awareness and help for your teams to do this. So first and foremost is all about sharing the work. migrating everything to a single platform so you have your source code, you have your artifacts is going to be critical for any InnerSource engagement, right? So for somebody to find out what you're doing, to discover and use something when you tell them, oh, my stuff's over in that repository, over on that system, and all of my artifacts are over there, it's going to be really confusing for people, but also really difficult to make sure that everybody has access, everybody has accounts, all that great thing. So first and foremost, bring everything together and share your work. And next is super helpful to create kind of that gold standard repository. At SPIES, we used the migration to the cloud repository. We pointed everybody to it. It had a README, a contribute me, we even had a support me file, all documentation, communications, how we set up our project boards, all of that was in there, labels, everything. It was ideal. Everybody didn't have to use it, but heck, you could just copy it and use it yourself, right, for your own organization. In GitHub now, you can even set up repo templates so that teams just that easily off the bat have those resources. And if you have access to the internet, which most companies do, you can go out to the open source community, github.com, and find a repository. Like Electron is a fantastic one, Atom's another great one, Microsoft, there's tons that are out there that you can bring into your own instances and share with your team. Next is to help the people find and use your project, right? So now that you've got everything in the same location, you actually want people to be able to find it. So the best thing to do is your repo settings, right? If things are private or if things are completely locked down, it's great that they're in a platform. If nobody can use it, you're not really going to engage anybody to start participating in InnerSource. In GitHub, for your on-prem instance, we have two types of setting. It's private, which means only the repository owners can determine who sees it. And then there's public, which means everybody in the organization can see it. On github.com, enterprises have a third option because public means the World Wide Web. We have internal repos, permissions. That means anyone in your org can see it. But this is a critical part, right? This is all about the open and transparency part. If I can find your stuff, I should be able to read it, at least at a minimum, read it, if not read and write for it. Documentation, super important. So, and I noted the kind of golden standard repository. You have a README, you'll have a contributing file as well. The README gives a contributor or someone who comes to your repository that insight into what your repository is. Why is it here? What are you doing? Who are the point of contacts? What are the positions of your team? Where can I find some documentation? Maybe it even points you to the actual production site, all that greatness. The contributing file is for people who want to participate in your work, in your product, and that is where you actually line out, here's how you can partake. Here's our code of conduct. This is how you could report a bug or a recommended strategy or a change, any of those kind of things. But these are two really important things to set up in repositories so that teams can start to engage instead of just messing around with whatever they want in repositories or not using them at all. And you want multiple types of documentation. Every organization has a different level of maturity, and some will just focus on the developers, but other organizations will have strategies all the way through the entire product chain. So you want to ensure that you're inclusive of those individuals as well. Security documentation, wikis, pages, all of that kind of documentation that can help anyone that's coming from maybe that not entirely technical understanding where they may not know how to read code, but they sure as heck can write or read documentation. Next, when people want to start coming to a repository and start to use it, you got to make sure that your repositories are set up with required code reviews, right? You can set up a team that's called code owners. You can implement branch protection, so you have transparency, so people can't just go in and muck around and do what they want, but you want to ensure that these things are met. So how do you help people become contributors? So if you are an individual contributor, or if you are a leadership chain, these are things you can do or encourage. Open an issue. I'm sure there is probably another project somewhere in your organization that you think is pretty cool, or somewhere in the world that you think is pretty cool, and you'd love to open an issue to kind of have a discussion around it. Improve documentation, review all those docs that I just talked about. I'm gonna come back to this one here in a second. Offer insight on an issue or a pull request. Somebody else created an issue and you have a comment or a thought about it. Provide unsolicited improvements. If you've ever gone to a website and just the way that maybe the drop-down menu works or a feature or a button is just kind of annoying, that's a great place to contribute back to a repository with just a suggestion. And then help them complete a backlog item or maybe fill out a roadmap item, something that would help. But quickly go back to the improved docs. I get the question all the time is, how do docs get updated? Like, there's so much documentation and you guys are touting, like, let's make sure you have all this documentation, but documentation gets old. It gets stale, it gets whatever, nobody wants to write it. One of the greatest things you can do with documentation, one of the greatest things you can do with new people is put them on documentation. Have them walk through your documentation with the application that they're about to use or the one they're about to build. Or this is a new team member that's onboarding and has no idea about your organization or anything you're doing. Making them walk through those documents makes them valuable immediately, right? Maybe it's just a screen capture that was a little bit outdated because it was an older version that was in a doc and they update that. This person's now all of a sudden effective, right? Typically a new hire or a new person or anyone that's not familiar with your team comes in, they usually feel pretty useless in the first few days, but having them support your team and improve the docs is just a huge win for everyone, so highly recommend that. Finding ways to contribute. So if your repository has a ton of issues and your team doesn't have a lot of time, you can create a label for help wanted. And you can identify the help wanted from, I need somebody who's a super beginner, that I need just like a newer set of eyes that can help us understand if we're too high of a level here. I need somebody who's good with docs, I need somebody who's good with Java, whatever the case may be, you can create those labels. And then other people can search repositories and find your labels so that they can see that SIO needs 24 issues need help. And you can click on that and find all of those issues that need help. It's a great way to encourage people to help, but also a great way to find places that you can start to contribute. And then the maintainers. So at SPIES, we did all of these things, we just didn't give them all the same weight. And we learned very quickly that maintainers are kind of obviously critical, but it's kind of like having a party in high school when your parents go away and the first hour you're like completely crazy. You're like, don't anybody break anything. But then as soon as people start having fun, you kind of let go, and the next thing you know, the police came, right? Because there's just complete chaos. So you want to make sure that you're focused on your maintainers so that that chaos doesn't happen. And either as a maintainer or as a leadership, these are the things to do or to encourage, and that's to set the vision and the direction of the work or the project that you're doing. And you can do that by issues documentation. You can create project boards in Github that actually align all of the methods or the phases that you do and how you handle things, and your users can start to see, or your contributors can start to see that process. Teach others. There is no reason why, as a maintainer, you should be the only one that knows everything about this repository. You absolutely want the more help, the more hands, the better, but you want people to understand your thought process and how you're going about maintaining these repositories. Setting and maintaining the tone, also important. How do you want people to be treated when they come and contribute? How do you want them to be responded to? What does that language look like? Is it all emojis? Is it only like 1 or 2 emojis with a limit? Whatever the case may be. And super important in any kind of InnerSource culture that you're, especially if you're starting to get your users to engage, always, always, always approve or deny or collaborate on every single submission. If it's something that's awful, don't tell the person that it's awful if you don't want to offend them, but absolutely respond to it and just say, hey, we're not thinking about this right now. We'll put it on the backlog. Thanks so much for coming out or for contributing where you can. But anything that sits, that person's going to be discouraged. Then other people within your community are going to see that, well, this repository doesn't do anything, nothing's happening. So it may not just be your repo that they get discouraged from, but it might start to branch out. So always make sure that you do something in response to submissions.